One of the problems with crypto in the last 5 years is because it's not regulated, anybody can get up on the soapbox and go, I can make you 100% a year, I can make you life-changing returns, right? I can't say, oh, you should trust me and I'll make you 100% a year because I'd go to prison or be fined.
Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Mr MoneyJar Show. If you've ever been wondering how to invest, we have the perfect guest on the show for you today. It's Andy Craig, the founder of Plain English Finance and the author of How to Own the World. Andy, welcome.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming down. I think that this is going to be a very interesting, very important episode for our guests.
I hope so. You're setting the bar quite high then.
I know that many of them are interested in increasing wealth and like prosperity and being financially better off, particularly within the context of the cost of living crisis and all this stuff that's going on with inflation and so on. But before we get into the main part of the episode, could you just tell us a bit about yourself? I'm really curious to know about your career.
Sure.
And like how you got started and then how you came to write your books and found Plain English Finance.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a long story because it's sort of 24 years now since I left university and joined the city, as what my grandmother used to describe as she thought I was a rogue trader, Alan, Nick Leeson and everything else. But basically, I did a conventional economics degree at Birmingham Uni.
Okay.
Finished in 97 and shortly after that went to work for Swiss Bank in the city and spent basically just shy of 20 years from then until I founded Plain English Finance, my company, and went full-time on it a couple of years ago, doing what's called smaller companies, which is traditionally like the role of a stockbroker, as people would understand it, who nowadays don't all wear like red braces and stick their hair back. But basically, the job is to sort of to explain to investors what a company does and then to motivate them to either buy or sell a share in a company. And I was super lucky because I joined Swiss Bank, which in the late 90s was the number one in smaller companies, which was the area I looked at. And smaller companies in that world was businesses like EasyJet or lastminute.com or even nowadays Marks and Spencer's is a smaller company. But
now EasyJet's on the FTSE 100.
Well, exactly. So the job was to try and find smaller companies that become much bigger companies, which, you don't always necessarily succeed at. But so I basically did 20 years of specializing in smaller company equities, so shares on the stock market. And about 8 years ago now, I specialized in life sciences companies, so biotech companies trying to cure cancer or come up with a machine that might take billions of cost out of the NHS, which was, I won't go into detail of why I did that, but, basically being an old school stockbroker was not it's a career that's been going the wrong way for 20 years, right? Economically. And so to become a specialist in an area, in a really interesting kind of cutting edge area like life sciences and biotech was very interesting to me. And I always ran alongside that for the last 10 years, ever since I wrote my first book, How to Own the World, my business, Plain English Finance, or plainenglishfinance.com, which basically was a reaction to the fact that even in the city, financial literacy is really bad, right? And it's kind of a problem that we're all aware of. Everybody knows, oh yeah, most people don't invest. Most people don't think about investment. But when we actually contemplate just how problematic that is for society, for British society, for individuals, for us as a culture, I think people really seriously underestimate just how important that is and just how problematic it is that nobody really knows about investment. And, if highly paid professionals in the city are really bad at like the nuts and bolts of ISAs and pensions and whatever else, what chance do the rest of the population
the average person. Yeah.
And so that's why, so basically about 10 years ago, I took a bit of a career break from that career, started a business called Plain English Finance. And the idea of that was kind of, does what it says on the tin, trying to demystify and make these sort of potentially quite complicated financial concepts like shares, equities, the stock market, bonds, commodities, gold, inflation, interest rates, whatever else. And I was I guess I was a bit of an angry young man because I was like, why does nobody know about this stuff? It's so important. It's world changing. Nobody knows about it. And actually what happened was I'd written about 100,000 words of content like over the course of, 8 or 9 months back in about 2011. And it was on my website on plainenglishfinance.com. And it was actually my cousin Mary said to me, Andy, nobody wants to read 5,000 words of your, nonsense and then click here to go to the next thing and read another why don't you make an ebook? And so I did. And that was How to Own the World, the first edition, published in September 2012 as an ebook on Amazon's platform. And then as a print version in January 2013. And quite quickly it became a sort of mini bestseller, and had dozens of 5-star reviews. And I thought, and it wasn't just my mum writing 5-star reviews or family members, and a really good response. And then like a lot of email subscribers, because we obviously had a facility for people to subscribe on email. But I kept on running Plain English Finance as a bit of a cottage industry, like my own little thing, kind of in the days before blogging and video blogs and everything else, vlogs, or whatever they're called. And it really just was producing regular output on email, just explaining, why is the stock market important? And in the time since then, I've written 90 pieces and another 2 books. And 2 years ago, I quit my kind of full-time job in the city. It's focused on, the biotech job, helping healthcare companies to raise money, to go full-time on everything to do with Plain English Finance, which is how I got to, meet people like you and have conversations like this, which is great, because I guess we are our mission as a company, and that sounds a bit kind of cheesy and Californian, but it's a real thing, is to improve the financial affairs of as many people as possible, because it's improving somebody's finances, as we'll hopefully come on to, is, I describe it as a silver bullet for the individual. This stuff's worked for like centuries, right? The technology of stock markets and investment and financial assets and capital markets are incredibly important for the individual. And anybody who kind of gets to grips with it properly and understands it has a really good chance of being properly wealthy, no matter how much they earn, genuinely, over a lifetime. But it's actually way bigger than that, because if many millions more people do that and learn this stuff, it's a silver bullet, not just for the individual and their dependents, but for society as a whole. And one of the biggest problems that Britain has right now, we have a cost of living crisis, we have inflation where it is. Actually, an awful lot of that is, we can blame the government, we can come onto that. Frankly, under Labour and the Tories in the last 30 years, very, very bad policy decisions have been made. But a huge amount of it, actually, as a culture, is to do with the fact that we're really bad at finance. We're really bad at stock market investment. We don't support and fund companies that could be creating real wealth and paying tax revenues and employing people and changing people's lives, right? And so, sorry, that's an incredibly long answer. But
thank you for the whistle-stop tour. I see myself in you a lot, and I do mean that as a compliment. There's lots of things that you said there that I really genuinely relate to, from being kind of the angry young man, kind of like, why don't more people know about this, to just doing what you could, and just, even if it was just writing words, like many, many words, and then putting it into something more accessible. And I love what you said there about like anyone can become wealthy. I believe that too. And I also believe that wealth is infinite. I think there's no limit to how much wealth can be created or generated by people. And that's why I do what I do. I want everyone to know this stuff, so that we can all build wealth together. Yeah, exactly. And in an era where you've got $3 trillion companies like Apple, right, which didn't exist 40 years ago. Yeah, that's right. And but maybe we'll come on to this, but I think one of the big counter arguments to that, which is an entirely valid one, is, if everybody was as wealthy as people in Switzerland, Britain, the United States, we'd need 8 planets. And so the kind of ecological environmental element is quite important. But the answer to that is, it's actually capitalistic entities that, clean rivers and revolutionize chemical processes, or are going to cure cancer or whatever else. And again, that's a big malaise in our society, is that people rail against these corporations, and there are tons of bad actors, right? We all know that, but there are bad actors in any area of life. But actually, a lot of the really good stuff that happens, reforestation, bioremediation, things that are really positive for the world, and actually just wealth creation, to your point, come from the fundamental technology of the stock market. Because actually, all the people very sort of scared by all this jargon. But what is the stock market? All it was is that back in the early 1600s, some really smart people in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, and then a few decades later in London, said, we want to fund voyages to the New World to go and find spice and whatever else they were up to in their comedy ships, the Golden Hind or whatever, and explore the New World. And even royal families couldn't afford to kit out like a flotilla of X number of ships to go to the New World. So these guys just came up with this idea of like, have a bunch of pieces of paper and say, if you put 1% of the cost in, you can have 1% of, if it goes wrong, you'll have 1% of nothing. If it goes right, you'll have that. And that's all shares were. They were just a technology to pool, to sort of syndicate and share risk amongst different people. And that technology is the reason we have aeroplanes and healthcare and hospitals and skyscrapers and football stadiums. And like, without that fundamental human technology,
we wouldn't have any of the wonderful things that modernity has. And I think we've lost, what part of my crusade is we've really lost sight of that, because people think about the stock market and financial markets in the abstract, and they think about evil bankers and incompetent government officials. And it's much more fundamental than that. It's just the technology to do a good job for humanity. And so that's kind of part of my mission.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also very interested in this topic as well, because I've done research on like the stock market and its origins and like the New World stuff. Like I read Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. And I was very shocked to learn that actually the first stock market entities were slave trading companies. And like that's where a lot of the kind of voyages went to. So also part of my mission is to try and educate people as to like the dark side of finance too, and how we can make capitalism a bit kinder.
Yeah, but I think to that point, I mean, that's entirely valid. Like the Dutch East India Company,
quite right.
But I think it's really important to understand today, capitalism has become about as sort of ethical. It's made a huge amount of progress. We can all, whatever your views on the anti-vax movement, or there are always bad corporate actors. But I've met over 1,000 chief executives in my career, over 1,000 companies, a long way over 1,000 by now, face to face, one-on-one, in a room with the management team of companies, ranging from a couple of scientists with an idea coming out of a university with trying to cure breast cancer, all the way up to companies valued in the many billions of pounds that are front page news and we all know, household names. And the vast majority of them truly are like really mission driven and actually quite good actors. And a big part of that is because companies actually reflect society. So, the more society becomes tolerant and sort of is moving in the right direction ethically, morally, the more the people you need to employ, the people, the investors you need, the better behaved they are, the more likely the company is going to be better behaved. And I think, again, we've perhaps come onto this. I think one of the biggest problems we have as a society is an inherent negative press bias. Like the press, we come home in the evening, spend half an hour watching someone in a dark suit tell us the 0.001% of terrible
bad
things
that happen
in the world today, which is really bad for us psychologically. Like it's a real mission of mine. There's this thing called news sobriety or news hygiene, which is actually, for most people, news has no utility. All it will do is make you depressed and angry, and it doesn't do anything for your life. And that's to say you should ignore the fact that there are problems in the world. But that one of the biggest problems we have is that because of that reality, everybody has a really, really distorted idea of how the world actually is.
Can I just say, like, this isn't what I expected to talk to you about at all.
Same, yeah, we've slightly gone off down a rabbit hole. But
thank you for engaging with that. I know it's like a topic that's quite difficult to talk about for people from all backgrounds. But like, yeah, I feel like you get it, and I feel like I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think that you're basically talking about the future of humanity.
Yeah,
and we have a lot to be optimistic about, and I think we do love each other, like 100%. Deep down.
And we're going to get there a lot quicker together if people don't spend 99% of their time focusing on the 1% of terrible things that are happening, which is what we do as a culture.
Yeah, when you look at any news channels, like most read stories and stuff, it is just a wall of doom.
It's war, terrorism, pestilence,
Why do you think people are like that?
So there's the famous newsroom saying is, if it bleeds, it leads. So I actually wrote a piece about this recently, like why pessimism sounds smart and why pessimism is so compelling, right? And it's basically because we're hardwired psychologically to pay. In an era where another human being was likely to chuck a spear at you or an animal was going to kill you, it paid to be super, super pessimistic and cautious because it kept you alive. Like that's how we're programmed. We have a bunch of cognitive biases that program us towards pessimism, which means that if you want to cultivate clicks or have more advertising revenues, if you're a media company, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what they say. They want to focus on war. But nobody takes a step back to say, well, is that good for us? And actually, just to sort of loop this back to our discussion around finance, this is one of the main reasons that people are so bad at finance, right? Because the only time most of the general population ever thinks about, hears about, talks about the stock market is because there's been a massive crash. And there's only a massive crash will happen every 10 years. And actually, if you know what you're doing, you can I wrote a piece called How to Invest So That Crashes Don't Matter. They don't need to matter at all in your ability to build wealth and become wealthy. No, you never need to worry about stock market crash if you know what you're doing and if you've got a very long run investment horizon and you get the right mix of investments, which is why my book's called How to Own the World, right? But if the only if the only recall you have cognitively ever about the stock market is a crash, funnily enough, you're going to think, oh, I don't want to do that, right? And that's why. So only 5% of British adults have a stocks and shares ISA. So 95%.
And most of them are men.
Yeah, that's right. And most of them are 40 or above, and right. And that is way so 3 times as many people have invested in crypto than have a stocks and shares ISA. And by the way, I'm not necessarily a massive bear of crypto, but the real world utility of I've just spent 8 years trying to raise money for companies that might have a half a shot of curing cancer or a cancer, and doing amazing things like a blood test that's £100 instead of thousands and thousands of pounds to give you an accurate cancer diagnosis. There's so much amazing stuff happening out there technologically, and it's incredibly hard to fund these things because nobody invests. So we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. This is why it's really important for society, not just.
I promise that you're not saying stuff, and I'm not saying like I completely agree, but like I completely agree. And this is what I say to people. I say, like, I've never posted about cryptocurrency. Like really, I've written articles more on like blockchain technology, and I did one post a couple years ago tracking the price of Dogecoin and Elon Musk's mentions of it on Twitter, because I thought that would be quite an interesting.
And by the way, if that was a regulated share, that would be illegal.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, you wouldn't be.
That's a big point. That. Crypto. So why? So at least 10 billion quid has gone into crypto assets from British adults, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, 10 billion quid, had it gone into real companies doing real things in the economy, we would have a much better society. We'd have better employment, because smaller companies. So 10 billion quid, when you think of the context of AstraZeneca, which is the biggest company in the FTSE, which is capitalized at 160 billion. So 10 billion quid's like government officials think, oh, who cares about 10 billion quid? 10 billion quid of risk capital.
Yeah.
So traditionally, like our parents' generation, if somebody had a few quid, if they had a half decent job, they would probably have put some money into smaller companies in the stock market. Smaller companies where all the innovation comes from, all the growth comes from, all the future large companies come from. Apple was a smaller company once upon, actually not that long ago, Facebook, whatever.
60s, right?
Apple was really the 70s.
70s.
Yeah, and didn't become a huge company until really the last 10 years.
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's funny when you think about those pink kind of the Mac computers that, as recently as the late 90s.
With the coloured backs.
Weird, that, some weird arty person would buy, not like a ubiquitous computer that everybody has. But so smaller companies do 60% of the profitability in the economy, 60% of the employment. They're super, super important. And one of the problems with crypto in the last decade or so, the last 5 years, is because it's not regulated, anybody can get up on the soapbox to go, I can make you 100 quid a year, 100% a year. I can make life-changing returns, right? And I have all my phone calls recorded, I have to keep records for 7 years, because if you're regulated by the FCA and you're involved with the stock market, so it's a massive competitive disadvantage. I can't say, oh, you should trust me and I'll make you 100% a year, because I'd go to prison or be fined. Everybody in the crypto space can. So it's been a huge failure of regulation, which I think is yet to play out. But it's, we all already know the answer, the result of that for thousands of people, if not tens or even hundreds of thousands of people all across the world. I mean, with Sam Bankman-Fried and, FTX, yeah. We know what the outcome has been. I mean, people whose lives have been shattered, like ruined by that, right? And I mean, that's a huge failure of regulation. But what doesn't get talked about enough is what economists call the opportunity cost, which is that has cannibalized away money that should have gone into companies that by now would have had half a shot of curing cancer. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's how close we are technologically.
I say this to people too. I haven't used the cancer example, but I think that would probably get people to pay a lot more attention.
Well, and I say that because I've just spent 8 years
with those types
immersed in those companies. And by the way, going around the city of London, everyone thinks of streets are paved with gold. It's incredibly hard to raise relatively small amounts of money for companies with world-changing science because of all these themes. It's not the only thing. The other theme, we might come on to this as well. So passive investing, just putting your money in an ETF that tracks the S&P 500 is a very sensible, inexpensive way for people who've never invested before to start investing. But the other problem with that is that if billions and billions and billions of investment capital go into just the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500, it's not going into earlier stage innovative companies. And that's taken billions, if not trillions of dollars away from innovation and science and R&D as well. So.
Yeah. The example that I give to people for that, in the opportunity cost of investing into non-productive assets like crypto, is I just talk about like aviation. So largely started at the start of the 20th century, needed capital to go into it. Now, and you were talking about how EasyJet used to be a small company, now it's a FTSE 100 company. If we just traded Bitcoin or Pokemon cards or stamps, whatever the case it is, for the whole of the 20th century, you couldn't go on, wouldn't be able to go on holiday in much the same as we do today. But the same is the case with curing cancer and innovation and all those other things. Why do you like, the thing is, if you say these things to people in a language that they understand, I think most people would be inclined to agree. What is it that happens in the brain that makes you want to get the 100% return in a few months?
Well, it's like humans are built, fear and greed. We all know how dynamic those things are. We are there. So in the exam materials for some of the exams you do as a stockbroker, they identify 46 cognitive biases.
Right.
So sort of, if you like, malfunctions of how your brain works. So things like recency bias. You remember something that happened recently far more than you'll remember something that happened years ago. There's a great example of so negativity bias, which is, so if a doctor says to you or a loved one, you have a 90% chance of surviving this operation, the likelihood is you'll say, like a life-saving operation, removing a tumor or whatever, you have a 90% chance of surviving. The person hearing that message will react differently to if they say, by the way, you've got a 10% chance of dying from this operation.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but they're exactly the same statistics. So sorry, it's a bit of an esoteric example, but the basic point is we're hardwired for failure. So in investment, for example, so if you think about just products, generally stuff you want to buy, a phone or a car or eggs, milk, beer, whatever, anything you might buy in a week, almost all products, the relationship between price and desire to buy them is that the more expensive they are, the less you buy them, and the cheaper they are, the more you buy them. There are a few goods where that's not true, which are usually called prestige goods. So people will pay a load of money for a Ferrari because they want to say, look at me, I can pay loads of money for her, or another luxury good like an aftershave. But most goods have that relationship where the more expensive it is, the less you buy, and the cheaper it is, the more you buy. Apart from financial markets, where the higher up something goes, i.e. the more expensive it is, the more people want to buy it, and the lower it goes. And that wreaks. So the stock market's basically returned around 10% a year for the last century. So from January 23 to December 22, and that's the American stock market, 10.34% a year, which is enough to make most normal people millionaires. Very, very few people understand this stuff. Very, very few people are doing that. And I've just lost my thread, which I tend to do when I'm feeling away. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm really glad with the direction this conversation's gone in, because we're speaking to the mentality of investing, the mindset.
And now I've remembered my thread. Sorry to interrupt you. The point I was going to make is, so the stock market's made 10.3%. The average investor's made more like 5 or 6%. And the reason for that is because every time there's a crash, which means the market's down, everybody goes, I've got to sell out. And every time everybody else is making money, which is prevalent in crypto, right? Everybody got sucked into crypto when Bitcoin was near all-time highs. And this is what happens time and time again. And so a big part of what I talk about in my book is you've got to take yourself and your psychological imperfections out of the equation. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is just to do something really simple every month without fail, and go la 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 and ignore the news. That's what works. I mean, the record. So because if you make 10, 11, 12% returns from the age of 25, when you can start saving 25 quid a month, to the age of 55, you've got a very good chance of having many hundreds of thousands, possibly even low millions of pounds. Like statistically, that's the way the maths works. And I know we were talking earlier, I think the other problem that people have is sacrificing your consumption today to make your 60-year-old self have a really good life and be a millionaire. The psychologists tell us that that's as weird as giving all of your... So if let's say you say you need to save 100 quid a month, even if you're on a relatively low income, or 10% of what you earn every month, if at all possible, right? And maybe you can't do that when you're 22 and you've just finished uni and you're renting in London, it's crazy. But for most people, you can start doing that at some point in your 20s, and maybe you get promoted and you're earning a bit more money in your career. You should be able to knock away a fair bit in like your 30s and then your 40s and beyond. But it's still a sacrifice, right? It's still like I can't go to the cinema, or I have to have fewer beers, or I can't use Deliveroo as much, or whatever it might be that you're sacrificing. And why am I doing this? So that my 60-year-old self can have £1 million and a great life and not, have to eat cat food in retirement, right? And rely on a government that, by the way, won't be able to afford to pay for them, because there's another thing we should come on to perhaps. And the psychologists tell us that for you to do that is as weird for you psychologically and as unattractive as going out in the street, finding a random 60-year-old person walking down the street and going, here you go, mate, here's £100 of my salary this month. And that's why we're rubbish at doing it. But you've got to, that's why I'm so passionate about this and have written books and, do all this stuff. You really don't want to be the 60-year-old that has no money. And if we just unpack why, so most of us are going to live to 100. Like anybody under the age of 40 is comfortably going to live to 100, probably, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say you want to retire at traditional retirement age, let's call it 60. You're going to have to fund 40 years of your life. If you want to travel and have fun, or at least not have to do a hardcore job and you've been doing it for 30 years and you need to chill out, right? So traditionally, we set up the pension system in 1909. We were the second country in the world to set up. In 1909, average life expectancy in the UK was 47. Now that was skewed by infant mortality because a lot of kids died before their 5th birthday. So most people probably lived into their early 50s, let's say. People who actually made it past 5 would make it. And some people, particularly wealthy people with good healthcare and the elite, made it to 70 or whatever, like people do today. Although not to 80 or 90, right? Because and we're going back to 1909. So when we invented the pension system, it was for anybody over the age of 70. So the government could afford, and it was great, because if you're in a mining community in Wales and you made it to 70, you could stop.
You're quids in.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. But very, very few people lived to past 70. So the pension system, as founded in those days, could absolutely support the relatively small number of people that were getting it. Today, we've got a dwindling number of workers. We've got an aging population. And by the way, it doesn't matter, Labour, Tories, politics, totally irrelevant. It's a mathematical, irrefutable, we have a massive, massive crisis coming down the line. And by the way, the cost of living crisis is all related to this. The fact that the NHS is in crisis is all related to this. 10 years ago, there were only about 100,000 people over the age of 90 in Britain. Today, there are 600,000, right? You could put hundreds of billions more pounds into the NHS in the next few years, and you're still going to really struggle to stop huge waiting lists and everything else, because there are loads and loads of old people, and 80% of cancer is diagnosed in the over 65s, right? Yep. And the same with every other disease, And so we're fighting a losing battle. And by the way, the only solution to this is that we all become better investors and we create the real, if we were to create 4 or 5 Apple-sized companies, the tax revenues and the wealth creation, the real wealth creation of doing that would be the thing that rides into our rescue and sorts us out and gives us enough wealth as pensioners and everything else. And what we've done under Labour and the Tories for the last 40 years is the 180-degree opposite of what we should have been doing. And that has led to a place where basically nobody in this country invests. We've gone from 60% of our 1.5 trillion of pension assets being in shares to 4% in the last 20 years. And if everything's in bonds, to your point earlier, bonds don't make anything. Bonds don't build buildings.
Yeah.
Cash doesn't create aeroplanes or cure cancer or any other things we're talking about, or grow food, right? And just creating money out of thin air, which is what we've been doing for 50 years, doesn't either. Because if you've got a fixed supply of stuff like cotton, wheat, coffee, sugar, crops, right? If you've got a fixed supply of stuff, so let's say you've got 100 units of stuff, billions of tons or whatever, 100 units of stuff, and you've got 100 units of money. The price of the stuff is 1. If you double the amount of money to 200 units of money, and it doesn't create any more stuff. So now all that happens is the price is 2.
Yep.
And that is why we have a cost of living crisis, because that's exactly what's been happening for the last 40 or 50 years. And John Maynard Keynes, arguably the biggest economist of the 20th century, said, not one man in a million understands inflation, which is why the government could do it. Because the reason the government wants to do it is because it erodes their liabilities to us as citizens, right? And so, good. Sorry that I've been monologuing non-stop at you
No,
for like several minutes,
no.
but this is the solution to all of this is that instead of 2% of the population understanding what we're talking about, 92% of the population understands about, because not only will it mean that they will have better lives as individuals, but it means we've got half a chance of having a much better, fairer, wealthier society where we can take care of sick people, we can take care of pensioners, and it sadly, you know, the reason that we're in the trouble we're in is because we've completely lost sight of this.
Yeah.
You know, in the last few decades.
No, I'm really happy with the direction this conversation has gone. And by the way, just as an aside, I try not to vocalize when people are speaking, so it's not me going.
No, that's fine. No, that's fair enough.
Like during the thing, so I just stick to kind of.
I wasn't disconcerted because you were nodding. So
yeah, no. You're really saying all the right things, and it's a really important context. I think that what's happening in the cost of living crisis is showing us that, like, it's really showing how money isn't real. Like, to your point about like real world goods and services versus like a currency that we use to
invented.
say, that stuff costs this much. Yeah. Let's speak to the 90% then, or the 95%. You spoke about how anyone can create wealth. We've spoken about how wealth is unlimited, and we've also spoken about how if you start with just small sums, you tune out the noise and you do something on a monthly basis, you can, between the ages of your 20s and your 50s, maybe your 60s, quite comfortably invest to the hundreds of thousands, low millions. So speaking to just the average person who maybe thinks about this stuff as risky or scary or doesn't know where to start, how do you start?
So I think the most important thing, I guess what our whole message is I don't want people to see me as like a financial advisor, give me your money and I'll invest it for you.
Yeah.
What I want, it's like the old proverb of, you know, catch a man a fish and he eats for the evening, to each man a fish and he can feed himself forever, right? The most important thing is a little bit of knowledge, right?
Financial education.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's important because there's a lot of financial education out there right now, and a lot of it has been given by people who perhaps don't have a really solid grasp in economic history. They don't know about the history of the stock market. They don't know. And they're, you know, I mean, you're obviously a massive exception to this, to be clear. But I mean, we've talked about this before. You know, one of the problems of the sort of finfluencer space, and I know you hate that word, but the explosion in information is that there's a lot of not very good information out there from people actually, you know, well, the crypto space is a really good exemplar of that. You wake up in the morning, I'm now an expert on crypto, and you know, last month you were working in a bar. I mean, and there's tons of that, right? So I think what people have to just spend, and it's like anything else in life, it's like, you know, if it's information that's worth having, it's information that's worth working for a bit. And you do have to work hard. I mean, like, people want stuff to come really easy, right? And I mean, I've got my book here. It's 372 pages long. And you know, it's not the only book, but it's I think for British people, because it's written for British people, which is quite rare. A lot of books on finance kind of focused on Americans. But, you know, as I was saying to you again earlier before we started this interview, a lot of people, investment's been around for 2 centuries. Like, the key technology of the stock market and the thing called bonds and, you know, cash, everybody knows about, property, gold, commodities, that stuff's been around for 2 centuries. And it's the reason that we have all of the fruits of modernity, truly. Without those things being invented, we would still be, you know, basically 99% of people would be farming.
Yeah,
right?
there'd be no iPhones.
Yeah, well, correct. And a lot of other things that are just as important or more important. You know, we wouldn't have this wonderful network modern world where everyone can travel around. How you approach that, the fundamental rules around how you approach investing and that stuff, it's what made the Rothschild family rich. I mean, like, every multimillionaire in history, every rock star has made much more out of their investments than they ever made from selling records, right? All the smart ones. And then there's all the ones who went bust, who didn't, right? Because that's another point on this is a point I often make, is that something like 75% of people who win the lottery in the States and in the UK and Europe, around the world, are bankrupt within 5 years of winning the lottery. 80% of athletes in America, professional athletes, are bankrupt within 5 years of earning millions of dollars a year. A similar percentage of ex-footballers in the UK, Premier League footballers, are bankrupt. 150 of them are in prison because the only way they could carry on making the sort of money they were making as a footballer was to turn to some kind of crime, right? That is a tragedy, because if you ever have that kind of income and you know just a little bit of information about how to invest and how these technologies of capital markets have worked, as I say, for 2 centuries. That should never happen, right? And it's that's just to show that it's, you know, there's another piece of evidence I use, which is that there's a famous book called The Millionaire Next Door that shows that statistically, most millionaires in America are normal people.
That would never have earned more than 6 figures.
Yeah, exactly. Or even, you know, a lot less than that, but they just invested in mutual funds, or, you know, without wanting to make it too complicated, the American stock market, and got their property roughly right, and saved money, and drove a Prius instead of a, you know, Ferrari, or, you know, and that's the difference. And so, but the point I was going to make is that technology, that approach has been around for 2 centuries. There's a 2-century track record that it works, right? Whereas all the new stuff that might make you 100% a year, like crypto. And so sadly, in this sort of culture we live in, people go straight past the stuff that works because it's boring and it takes a while, but it works, to the stuff that might work if you're extremely lucky and doesn't take that much, and you just listen to your mate on Facebook and hopefully you'll make supernormal returns. And it also confuses the difference between investing and trading, which are 2 really different things. So investing is what I'm talking about, is like 10% of whatever you earn every month forever into something that's worked for 200 years. It will give you a good result. It will take a while, but the key thing is to make sure that that's money that you trust me, for most people, you know, and I worked in a bar in my early 20s, you know, I know what it's like for rent to brutally just take all your money every month. But for most people, if you calibrate your life so that you can live, how do I spend 90% of what I earn?
Yeah.
Then the 10% that you can save actually becomes easy, automatic. It's much easier than people think.
Richest man in Babylon.
Exactly.
And we had Poku Banks on in a previous episode, and he said, your wealth is the difference between how much you spend and how much you make. And it's really, you have to realize, well, I have 2 brothers. My youngest brother is 17, and he's really good with money. He's got a big pot of savings, and
a lot of his age group are, right?
Yeah.
Which is encouraging.
I'm really like proud of him. And what I say to him is like, look, the same way you have a bank account, I have a bank account, businesses have bank accounts. And when you buy something from them, you transfer money from your bank account to their bank account permanently. Now, obviously, there are going to be things that you need to do that for, like the roof over your head, your bills and your food and stuff. But then for your disposable, there's this massive battle that's going on where all of these companies have employed some of the smartest people in the world who can access you anywhere on your phone. It's not just on the radio or billboards anymore.
Behavioral stuff, gamification.
Yeah, all the stuff that you spoke about before, to try and get you to send that money to them, and then it stays with them forever.
But I guess what we're here to say is that that's fine, actually, as long as you do it with 90% of what you earn.
90%, yeah.
And it's not that, I mean, if you actually really ruthlessly sit down and think, what rubbish am I spent? You know, how many times did I order delivery last week? Look, I know there are a lot of people who are challenged economically, and I know that I come from a certain background. I worked in the city, and so it's very easy. Oh, well, you worked in the city. But you know, I just really believe, I think the evidence of history, and that millionaire next door point is the same kind of point, is that it's not that difficult to make a little change. And the crucial thing is, if you do that, you forget about it. And over a long period of time, it will make a huge difference. So why not do it? Because it's definitely going to be better than not doing it. And it's definitely better than, the other point I was going to make is, you know, when I talk about people, so trading is hard. Investing is quite easy. I always talk about learning how to invest sensibly is no harder than learning how to drive a car. Like, most people think it's normal to learn how to drive a car, and they're like, oh, investing, that's like crazy and complicated. It's like, no. The same number of hours to do those 2 things. 90% of people learn how to drive a car. 1% of people learn this crazy societal blind spot, which causes us untold pain and problems, individuals and society, right? And sadly, at the moment, with the power of social media and exactly what you're talking about, a lot of people go straight past investing to trading, and they don't realize they're 2 different things. And trading is hard. You know, you probably need a degree's worth of knowledge to do trading really well, and it's got a very high chance of losing you money. And you know, and it's like, if you're doing trading crypto instead of investing in the stock market, that's like, when you've never done any financial stuff before, it's like being a white belt in judo and going and trying to fight black belts straight away, because that's what crypto trading is.
I think Charlie Munger also said, like, people have a sense that they can't just compete in the Olympics in like whatever sport they want. But when it comes to investing, they want to compete in the investing Olympics. But I'm going to issue a challenge to you.
Yeah.
Then, because
this sounds interesting.
Because you're very knowledgeable, you're very passionate, and the stuff that's in your head, like if everyone knew it, we would live in this world that we spoke about where people can build wealth and so on. And when we were speaking earlier, you said that you weren't on Instagram and you weren't on TikTok. Now, when we talk about investing, we talk about liquidity. And I think that when you have information in your head, it's the most illiquid it can be, right? It's in your head, it's there.
Yeah.
When you put it into something like a book, let's say you've made it slightly less liquid. When you put it into podcast format, slightly less liquid. You put a video on that podcast, slightly less liquid.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the most liquid form of information transfer in the world today is social media, is short form content and stuff. And like, what would you say to that? Like,
well, so what I'm going to say to that is I've already shot 45 minutes of YouTube videos. I write regular email stuff, which are relatively long form. But what I would say in my defense there is this stuff has to be long form. Like actually
not everything can be
correct.
Fast food.
Well, that's exactly right. Like if you actually want to be confident that you've got it and you understood enough so you can actually, because there's a big difference between going, oh, I'm getting into finance podcasts and I'm listening to this and I've watched this person, that's interesting, and actually transferring money out of your bank account into an investment. Like that's a big leap for a lot of it, and it should be, right? And so before you do that, you don't just want to do it because you've watched a 3-minute or a 1-minute TikTok, right?
And do you know what? I actually accept that.
But I am going to be doing on YouTube.
Yeah, I accept that defense, because something I say to people who, I'm very bullish on financial education on social media, particularly to reach the younger generation. But the example I always use with people is, if you went to the airport and you were given the choice of 2 pilots, one of whom studied like how to fly a plane,
or
and the
surgeon.
Or a surgeon, and the surgeon's like, well, I didn't go to uni, but like I've watched some TikToks on,
exactly.
on it, so should we perform heart surgery on your mum? Like you'd go with the person who studied. But what I do think that social media is very good for is it's a good lead generation tool,
100%.
and it's a good it's a way of information snacking. So your YouTube, your book or whatever is like the meal, but if you want to draw people in, you go with
a slightly nefarious way of putting it, or it's a gateway drug, right? And we all need a gateway drug to take us, that's right. If it's bite-sized and easy to consume, then hopefully, even if it's a year later, somebody might think, do you know what? It's about time I actually read a proper book.
Because on the previous episode of this, we interviewed very intelligent young guy, Cameron Smith, Kazatime. He got started on social media. He is a product of social media, financial education stuff. Yeah. He started to watch the stuff, then he started to make the stuff. And then now he's teaching other people. And he got first at uni. He's like an engineer at BT. So he's a really switched on guy. Yeah. And sometimes, because I'm 33, I have to not think about how young people are behaving today, but what I would have done if I was coming up now. I would obviously like be on TikTok and like doing all of that stuff. I am on TikTok, but like I'd be on it in the same way the young person is today. If I was that age, just the same way I was doing all the stuff that teenagers were doing at the time when I was a teenager.
Yeah. Same. Although slightly dating me, I was realizing that I didn't have an email address until I went to university, and I didn't have a mobile phone until after I left university.
Oh wow, I got a mobile phone at age 10.
But isn't that correct? And I'm still like a walking, talking, breathing human being, right? Who hopefully doesn't look horrendously old. But like in my lifetime, we've gone from like Commodore 64 and Spectrum 48K computers to smartphones that are more powerful than NASA's computers that land on the moon. Yeah, it's nuts, right?
Yeah,
but no, I agree. Look, so we are just about to launch a YouTube channel, and but my content is usually 2,000 words per email, which is roughly translates into about a 10 to 12 minute video. So it's going to be like a 2,000 word email and a 10 to 12 minute video sent at the same time from now on in a few weeks' time. The only caveat to that is because I run 2 investment funds, I will never, I have to do, I have to do 100 things for the FCA every year for the financial rate. I mean, and I've got to be very careful how I triage my time optimally. But yeah, look, it's really important to do this. But that's why also I love the leverage that comes from speaking to people like you. Because,
we'll clip you up. Don't worry.
Great. Yeah. Please don't make me look as old and grey and fat as I am now.
No, we'll use all the filters and stuff.
Yeah,
no, this conversation's gone a different way to where I thought it was. But I agree with everything. I really do. I say less sophisticated versions of many of the things that you said to me today to other people.
I find it hard to believe that they're genuinely less sophisticated.
And like I love your knowledge, your passion. I'm completely with you. Just in this last part of the conversation, before we ask you the question that we ask everyone, is just speaking to the average person on the street, the 90% of people who don't do this stuff. What is just a very simple way to invest in that monthly, tuning out the noise way that you described?
So it's to get a stocks shares ISA. Well, there are two main things. The first is, which most people nowadays have some recourse to through their employer, most people, your pension. Just learn a little bit about pensions, make sure that something's happening with that. And like, it doesn't take long. If you basically know what the stock market is, and the US stock market, and the British stock market, if you can just talk to somebody, whoever at your company is in charge of your pension, because we've had this auto enrollment rule for a few years, which means that most employees should have some money going into their pension every month. Who is it at your company? If you've been at your company for any length of time, who is it that's sorted that out? Have you looked at the paperwork? Do you understand it was just something you signed and you couldn't be bothered with? Don't do that. Figure out what that is. So that's step one, because it's a tax advantaged account. If you then still have a little bit of money, and so you can start with 25 quid a month, right? That's what I always say. If you can manage to find 25 quid a month, and preferably a bit more than that, especially as you get older and hopefully you make a bit more money, the next best thing in the UK, we're so lucky in the UK, we have a thing called a stocks and shares ISA. And you can invest up to 20 grand a year. So that's 1,600 quid roughly a month into thousands of things with an account. The stocks and shares ISA is not an investment, it's just an account. That means that any returns you make in the money that's in that account, however you do that, is tax-free. And that's huge. Like, most people don't understand that, but let's say you get that to £600,000 or £700,000 by the time you're 60. The fact that the government's not going to then take £200,000 or £300,000 of that is pretty good news, right?
Even more so than a pension, which is a tax deferred account, right?
That's right. Yeah. So there are different, and again, we get slightly, this is why it has to be slightly long form, but to try and really distill it down, put 25 quid a month into an ISA account and do something sensible with it. And for most young people, the most sensible thing you can do is to buy something called the MSCI World Index, which is basically, you can either buy the 1,600 biggest companies in the world or the 3,600 biggest companies. There's the MSCI World, the MSCI All World. And all that does is, so I always say that the number one investment theme in human history is human progress. Like, why has stock markets grown at 10% per annum for the last century? Because a century ago, we didn't have, air travel. I mean, there were a few airplanes, but not billions of people traveling every year. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have silicon chips. So the reason the stock markets, it's just because of human progress. That's how real wealth is created. So all you want to do, that's why my book's called How to Own the World, is just have something that gives you financial exposure to human progress.
Love it.
Cheers.
To sign off, what we like to ask everyone on the show is, what's the best piece of money advice you've ever received? Who shared it with you, and what did you learn?
Cool. Okay. So it will be, my dad is Northern Irish, and that means a certain type of person, right? I mean, so basically there's the Northern Irish Presbyterian, like, all about thrift, and, I really admire that background. Actually, it has its own challenges as well, but basically Northern Irish graft, work ethic, and crucially saving. That whole save and invest every month is deeply inculcated in that kind of background, and I learned it from a very young age. So, Dad, hopefully you won't be watching this. You won't like the Northern Irish accent, but it's that piece of advice from a very young age. And actually, I did a paper round, right, when I was really probably illegally young, and I used to make £15 a week, which was a lot of money for a paper round in the 80s or whatever it was, and I put that, at the time, that went into a post office savings account, which was paying 10 or 11% interest rates, because that's what interest rates were at that time. And when I went to uni, I had quite a lot of money, for a young student, from doing a paper round. So yeah, but obviously I would have spent it all on radio controlled cars and Games Workshop figurines or Dungeons and Dragons or can we cut that bit? But, you know, the geeky things that I did as a 12-year-old boy, had I not had that piece of advice from my dad, which is always save some money every month, no matter what.
Thank you very much, Andy. For people who want to find you, where can we find you?
Very easy, plainenglishfinance.com, plainenglishfinance.co.uk, because you can do all the socials. I'm on Twitter. We're about to relaunch YouTube, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, but not Instagram and TikTok, which I probably won't do because I just haven't got time, much as I know where you're coming from. But plainenglishfinance.com, and we have a free email list. I only email about every 2 to 4 weeks. So it's not one of those ones where you sign up to it and then every day you have to delete it and kind of be annoyed. It's a proper, I only email when I've got something to say. So plainenglishfinance.com and sign up to our email list, basically.
Andy, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's been great to be on this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for watching this week's episode of the Mr MoneyJar Show. If you enjoyed it, then please do subscribe, as it helps out the show a lot and enables us to continue running. Anyway, we'll be back next week with another special guest. I've been your host, Timmy Merriman Johnson.